It's 2020 and maybe you think it's time to be making a webcomics this year.
I think that's a great idea.
But how do you know where to start off if you're a beginner in the webcomic space? In this video, I will share with you 3 things you need to figure out at the start of your webcomic. Happy New Year, everyone! I'm so glad you're here. My name is Henrike and I help artists make and promote their own comics. You heard that right. I'm focusing down my channel on making comics specifically. It was a hard decision, it was slightly scary, and I will probably make some art in general videos in the future, but for now the main focus is going to be making your own comics. If that is something that you're interested in, then please consider subscribing to my channel. You can find the link below. Starting a webcomic can be hard. New developments happen all the time and the possibilities in 2020 on the web are basically endless. You can make pages on your own WordPress site, you can make scroll comics on Webtoons, you can make single panel swipe comics on Instagram, you name it. When I started making the first pages of my webcomic in 2016, that was basically no different. How do you set up your new comic in a way that it is future-proof and that it saves you a lot of headache in the long run in terms of making all kinds of adjustments because you didn't set it up right? Well, the digital landscape might change a little bit every single day. With these 3 steps, you will always have a clear idea of where to start even before you pick out your materials or you figure out what your story is going to be about. Before I dive into the steps, I want to explain some of the technical stuff that you're going to run into. I'm going to talk about materials and techniques and programs in later videos, but now if you want to start with webcomics, this is the stuff that you need to know. I talk a lot about comic pages because that is the thing that you see the most. You see it in comic shops, you see it on a lot of websites. You even see comic pages being uploaded to things like Webtoons or Tapastic, even though those sites are not really made for traditional comic pages. But a page is divided up into panels. Those are the individual pictures on the page. In the panels, you will have word balloons that has dialogue. You will have sound effects that are called onomatopoeias in actual comic lingo. And usually the panels have like a border around them, and then you have, they don't touch, but you have kind of like a white space or any other color, kind of like blank space in between them, and those are called the gutters. And some people don't even have gutters. They will just have one big panel that is their background, and then usually they stack panels on top of that background, and then the background will have like above or below will have the will have another kind of like story moment. And then for print, if you're going to print your comic, then usually printers, because of the way they print, they want some extra space around your comic page. So even if you have blank space next to it, because that's like your page border, you still might want to add an extra few inches or millimeters depending on where you live. And that is called the bleed, and that will be cut off when you print. If you have a panel that stretches out and it actually touches the border, then you really want to spread that panel out even into the bleed, because if it gets cut off by the printer, you know that there's not going to be any those ugly, like super small, tiny white little lines next to your panels. So that is why you actually, if you have an extending panel like that, you actually want to spread it out all into the bleed area. It's going to be cut off, so don't put anything important in there, but you might want to do that. I know for European printers, or at least here in the Netherlands, I hear a lot like 3mm bleed, which means 3mm around the entire thing, so 6mm vertical and 6mm horizontal in total. That's what you need to add. Think about resolution, because you're making comics for the web, and on the web, like PPI and DPI, it doesn't really matter much, but if you're going to print, that actually matters. When you make digital imagery, you're used to thinking in pixels. The thing though is that a pixel doesn't have a physical size. It's just a pixel, and it depends on your screen and it depends on your browser, kind of how that pixel behaves and how it is displayed, how big it is. So if you're going to print, without getting into too much detail, always go for 300 pixels per inch. In Photoshop or any other digital program, it's called pixels per inch. It's sometimes confused with DPI, dots per inch. which is a printer term, and that's actually the amount of dots that the printer will put on the page. But that doesn't really apply when you're working with digital images on a computer. So the actual term in Photoshop is PPI, pixels per inch, and then you want for the size that you set. If you set a size in Photoshop, like a physical size, like centimeters or inches, you want to put that to a resolution of a minimum of 300 pixels per inch. So without further ado, back to the video. So let's dive in. Step number 1, web only. Print. What is your main goal with your comic? You can save yourself so many hours of redoing things on pages if you can figure out if you want at least the option of printing your comic in the future. The reason why this matters is that this decision will influence your size, your resolution, your format, and even your colors. There's no right or wrong answer here. If you want to post your comic purely for your own enjoyment, or you want to build an online audience only, then it's perfectly fine to go with web only. The advantage of that is that you can go completely crazy with the size, or you can make a seamlessly flowing scroll comic, or you can even use animation. If you want to print and sell your comic though, whether it's through a Kickstarter or you're going to print it yourself and take the comic with you to cons, you want to be thinking about making life easier for your future self. So that means picking a format that's easy to print and working at least 300 ppi of resolution. For my comic Recollection City, I decided that it's going to be a webcomic first and print second. This means that I still use the minimum requirements that are needed to print a comic well. I'm using a traditional format, a traditional comic page format. I use white gutters. I have bleed around my pages that I take into account and all that stuff. I do post online in a size that's easy to read because it is a webcomic first, so I want everything to be seen clearly. I want it to be read clearly. And I also use the RGB color mode in Photoshop. When I'm going to print, that's going to give me a slight bit of problem because then I have to convert it to the CMYK color mode, and that usually gives you some colors will become more dull. But because it is a webcomic first, I wanted to use the broadest possible spectrum of colors, so that's why I deliberately chose to work in the RGB color mode. And then when I go to print, basically everything is set except for the color. It's the only thing I probably have to touch up, and the rest is good to go. But let me be clear, it's not the end of the world if other opportunities come up later. A good example of this is Stephen McCraney's Space Boy. Stephen recently got, or a while ago, he got a publishing deal, actually, but he makes his comic on Webtoons, which means that it's a seamlessly scrolling like format. And he used compositions and stuff that supported that. So what he actually needed to do was chop up the comic pages, like this entire big long scroll comic. He had to cut it all up and turn it into a book format. It still worked. You can see it on some pages, like it's, you know, they had to make do a little bit, but it's not jarring. Like the comic reads very well in print. I have it at home, and you know, it's a little bit of work, but it's still doable. So if you decided to make a comic on the Webtoons because you really want to publish on Webtoons, just go for that. And if other opportunities come up later, just see what you're gonna do. An example for kind of the opposite way around is, I guess, Jason Brubaker, who makes Remind and Cithra and is now working on other comics as well. But what he would do for the first two books that I mentioned was he designed for book first, because he does a lot of Kickstarters, so he wanted the book to be the best way it could look in print, and he actually converts it into the Webtoons format afterwards. That's a lot of work. I did that for Recollection City for a while, but it's just so much work to actually cut up your comic. And then my comic had a lot of very broad panels, while Webtoons is very narrow and it works better vertically, and my comic is more horizontally. So I felt like it took so much time. I had to cut so many things up, and I had to re-letter everything and make balloons look better and stuff, and it was just too much work. So that's why I stopped posting on Webtoons. But Jason really makes it work, and he posted the entirety of Cithra on Webtoons, and then his book was already done for print. But this is why it is good to think about whether you want the option for print in the future. If you already know that, it's good to keep that in mind and then figure out what your priority is going to be. And this brings me to the second point. Do you want to self-host your webcomic, or do you want to use a third-party platform? And keep in mind that this can also mean social media. So figure out where you want to post your webcomic. If you choose self-hosting, which is completely valid, like I do that, you will have complete control over your webcomic, how it looks, what to do, what your site looks like, and you're not dependent on the whims of a third-party platform that can basically drop off the air in any single moment. The downside of self-hosting is that you have to maintain your own website, but also drive all the traffic to your comic to your site by yourself. Do not underestimate this. This is a lot of work. Also because more and more readers are flocking to websites like Webtoons or Tapastic because it's just very easy as a reader to have all the comics that you are keeping up with in one and the same place. You can get notifications when they update. It's just very easy. So there is people who will only read comics on Webtoons because it's just easy and it's less to keep up with. So alternatively, you can choose one of the big comic publishing platforms that are on the internet nowadays. One of the biggest ones obviously is Webtoons at the moment. And that's completely valid as well. You have the advantage of when people find you there, it's so easy to subscribe to you. They can give you likes, they can give you comments right there. It's still a lot of work to become visible on those platforms because it's so saturated with comic creators. So it might actually take a while. It still takes a lot of effort for you to actually make your comic known. You still need to drive people to that specific comic on the platform so they can subscribe to you. But it's super easy to do. It's super easy to post there. You don't have to maintain anything. And you have the possibility of being found in their search. You can also choose to post your work to social media only. For example, Instagram works great for Gag-A-Day comics because if you post the panels like single panels and you let people swipe, it's usually still very readable on mobile. And for example, things on Facebook, I see a lot of people post their comic, like their main hub will be Facebook. And they post relatable, shareable comics. People share it on their timeline and people tag their friends in the comments. So it's very easy to build an audience in that way. You still need to put in the work, but if you can get traction on one of these platforms, then usually the shareability on these platforms is very high. You have kind of the danger of the comic being spread so far or even reposted. It happens to all comics, but on social media, I see that happening more often, that it can be really easy for the comic and your name to get kind of separated. So it's just this random comic. So definitely, if you post on Facebook and stuff, just put on your website, your name, at least on your comic page so that people can find you if they want to. But yeah, that could be a great place. The downside to social media is that as soon as the algorithms change, it can mean that your engagement can fluctuate. So keep that in mind. But if you want a very, very easy platform to post to, then pick one of the social media platforms because it's really easy. Another approach entirely is to post your comic behind a paywall, something like Patreon. But I actually recommend you only do that when you have an audience that you could drive to that. It's very, very hard to promote something and even sell something that people cannot see. So if you're not already an established comic author or you have a big social media following, it might be really hard. Either your art has to be really good or you need to be heavily promoting it. Of course, you can have multiple places on the internet where you post, but if you decide that your main efforts are going to go to one specific platform, then it might be a really good idea to design your comics specifically for that platform. And that brings me to the last point, but first, I'm super curious. If you're going to start your comic now, what are the platforms that you would really want to post on? I'm very curious. Maybe I can make some videos about those specific platforms. So let me know in the comments below what you would like to see. Step number 3, gather the specs. And by specs, I mean technical specifications that you have to work with. I will talk about self-hosted comics in a second. For a third-party platform, they usually have specific requirements for you to meet to be able to post on their platform. These can usually be found in the FAQs. So I would advise you to go to that website you want to post to and kind of figure out what the best way for you to make your comic is. They usually have limitations in terms of pixel sizes or file sizes, you know, and specific formats. So make sure you know those beforehand. In terms of format, it is very helpful to actually design the compositions on your pages in a certain way. For example, Webtoons and Dapastic are vertically scrolling comic formats. You can post pages, they just don't read very well on mobile, and the whole idea behind Webtoons is to read it on mobile. So I would advise you to kind of look at what works best for each platform. I know, for example, Instagram and Twitter work really well with square images if there's more than one image. So that's something to keep in mind as well. On Instagram, you can make use of the swipe, like the carousel feature. On Twitter, you kind of have to, you can either make a thread or, you know, you can make a 4-page comic and then have 4 little squares in one post. So design your pages and your panels accordingly. Also make sure that your font is still readable on mobile, if that is a way that you want your audience to be able to read that. It's better to have a little bit bigger text than smaller text that people have to strain to read. When you've gathered all your specifications, make a handy list that you can keep around at all times that has all the specifications on there and you never have to think about them again. As some general tips, if you work for web only, I would still advise you to work a little bigger than you need to in case you need to print larger versions. For example, if you want to do merge or if you want to create a banner, if you go to a con. So it might still be good to work in the 300 ppi resolution that I mentioned earlier. Self-hosted comics, you are a little bit more flexible in how you make your comic look. I know some people who want to print their comic, they just pick the standard print size that's current in your country. You can do that. You can definitely work with that. It might be good to find some comics on your bookshelf or in the library and see what kind of appeals to you. For my comic, I had a few comics that just felt good in terms of like the space you had to draw, and it looked good on a shelf. So I kind of took a few comics as inspiration, and I eventually did a lot of paper cutting and printing some test comics that I did on it, you know, experimenting with fonts and word balloons so that I can kind of figure out if it would look good if it was printed. And that's the thing I eventually went with. So now you have a better idea about how to prepare your comic so that you can start making it without you having to tear out your hair in frustration later because, for example, everything is the wrong size. If you want even more tips on how to start your comic well, then be sure to subscribe to my weekly email list where I provide you with motivation, tips, tricks, and everything to help you start and finish and promote your own comics. As a welcome gift, you receive my ebook that's about my 10 biggest tips for successful personal projects, and it actually talks about a lot of things. It talks about motivation, practical tips, story, time management, and all the stuff that you need in order to have the best chance of starting and finishing your own comics. If you like the sound of that, click the link in the description below, subscribe, and download the ebook. So do you want to start your own comic this year, or do you maybe want to continue your current comic? Let me know in the comments below. In my next video, I will share the biggest tip I have to kind of get started in comics a little bit easier, and also something that will improve your comic making game even faster. Be sure to subscribe, hit the bell button below so you don't miss any videos. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe share the video with a friend who also likes to make comics, or maybe you have an audience that likes to make comics. I would like to reach as many people as I can. I'm super excited for this year as I'm doubling down on making these videos about making comics and possibly help you get your comic off the ground, help you continue and finish your comic. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.